First, we would like to express gratitude for the opportunity to have this interview. And also, I think it's important to highlight that that is worldwide exclusive. It's your first interview for the last 8 years. And my first question, why did you decide to disappear? Why did you decide to stand by your husband and to keep silence all these years?
Well, from my perspective, it was never a question of preference. I stood by him because my conviction didn't tell me otherwise. As for the publicity, I've never been one to chase it, so I couldn't really answer your question.
Okay, let's start from the Syria before the war. What do you remember about this country?
Well, Syria before the war was undergoing considerable change in many areas. Examples included significant economic growth, the opening up of the economic landscape, unprecedented legislative reform, and the emergence of a new generation of civil society organizations. Now, in spite of this progress, no doubt many challenges remained, not least in terms of insufficient economic opportunities for a young population, the unequal distribution of income, the unprecedented consequences of a drought that Syria had never seen before, as well as the influx of over 1 million Iraqi refugees. Throughout all of this, my role has always been to strengthen Syrian social fabric and support its local communities. And more specifically, this translates to promoting initiatives that encourage inclusive economic growth, primarily through microfinance initiatives, working with civil society organizations to make them stronger, and working with young people to ensure that they have the right skills and abilities and opportunities so that they can reach their full potential.
Being the First Lady comes with many responsibilities. I would like to know about your goal at the beginning of this important way.
Well, I'm not sure if you know, but I used to be an investment banker. I was heading to Harvard to do an MBA. So you could say that becoming First Lady was never a part of my career plan. This position doesn't come with a job description or a manual. And so I decided to approach it from a citizen's perspective. What could I do to make my country stronger and fairer? And from the very beginning, I was drawn to helping empower people that work very, very hard every day, often with limited resources, to make the best of their lives. Meeting these people, listening to their stories, and seeing for myself the difference that they make in their communities afforded me the opportunity to draw attention to their cause and help create a more enabling environment for them to thrive.
You established many important programs as microfinance, as scientific Olympiad, as youth empowered. What priorities has changed?
Well, my work in these development initiatives continues uninterrupted. They're very well established, and if anything, they have become more important since the beginning of the war. But of course, my priorities today are helping martyrs' families, helping injured soldiers and people that have been displaced or affected by this war. It's because of these people that Syria is standing today, and we owe it to them to honor their sacrifice. A lot of my work involves ensuring that they have the essential means to reintegrate into daily life, whether it's prosthetics for the injured, or work opportunities for widows, or dignified arrangements for the displaced. If I'm helping Syrians, then ultimately I'm helping the president as well.
And what about martyrs? What is your strategy in working with such families?
Anna, they've sacrificed so much. It's our duty, moral duty, to ensure that we honor their sacrifice. It's well known that you should never leave a soldier behind on the battlefield. And the Syrian army has been working tirelessly to make sure that the right mechanisms are in place and legislations have been changed so that the needs of these families are met and they are also not left behind. My meetings with these families are in the aim of ensuring that these systems are accommodating and responsive to their needs. On a personal level, I'm humbled by their determination, their resilience, and their love of Syria. They are my biggest source of strength and hope for the future.
But why you would like this work seems to be disappear on the worldwide? I mean, newspapers, channels, they do not speak about your charity or what you are doing today.
I think that's a question you have to ask them.
And that's the reason we are here. So we spent a week with you, working hard, and we saw you during meeting with different peoples. Let's start from your visit in hospital. What do you feel deeply inside when you are meeting with wounded soldiers?
I could tell you that I feel pain and sadness, but a lot of other people would say that as well. I think what's more important is what we do with our feelings, how we can channel those feelings into initiatives that can help these soldiers or victims rebuild their lives. So what's more important is what I'm doing rather than how I'm feeling.
And do you remember the story about the woman and his son? He's paralyzed. What do you feel talking with his mother? What do you able to confirm her?
Again, what's important, I think, is that the social structures, whether it's medical, psychological, or economic, are in place to be able to help these people. That's what they're looking for. They're not looking for kind words or a pat on the back. They need real help to be able to rebuild their lives, and that's where my work focuses.
And what do you feel when you hear such an answer? I have no pain, I have no future, I have no motivation to continue living. Or, excuse me, I was shocked by the answer when the man told you, I have no opportunity to buy even a chicken for my family.
Unfortunately, that's not the only case. As much as our soldiers believe in what they're fighting for and why, even the strongest spirits find it difficult to suddenly adjust to having to be completely dependent on somebody else. They have sacrificed so much, and it's our duty to deliberately honor them and make sure that they are taken care of. And it's for that reason we have dedicated teams of professionals that reach out to soldiers and their families and work tirelessly to make sure that the structures are in place. As I said, the economic, psychological, and medical structures are in place to help them rebuild their lives. Despite the challenges, and there are many, slowly but surely, these brave soldiers are finding their way again. They're contributing to society and even starting families. And in these troubled times, they're beacons of hope for all of us.
You take a great responsibility because you have, I don't know, thousands of requests, and you promise to everyone to do everything the best of you. Why? It seems to be impossible to help each person, to help each wounded soldier or displaced or family who has kidnapped.
You heard the stories as well as I did. Could you ignore them? That's impossible. In Syria, we believe in honoring our word. This is very important. And I offer the help because I'm confident that the necessary arrangements are in place to be able to address these needs. I'm able to mobilize a very strong, extensive network that has been built up over the years of government, civil society, and private sector. And experience has meant that most of these requests can be handled through these established channels. But for me personally, every visit, every opportunity provides a new chance to identify shortcomings in the current systems and processes that need to be changed. And in this way, the effects are multiplied. And if the changes are made, then other people will no longer have to deal with the same problems.
And how do you control your team to make this request become true?
Well, as I said, first of all, in Syria, our word is our honor, and this is very important. And obviously, the people that work with me share this belief and work within this conviction. Beyond that, I'm a very firm believer in systems, in institutional frameworks that ensure that responsibilities are clear and targets are clearly identified. And by the way, Syria is a small society, and so there have been many times when I have met the same people again. So there's always a way of checking.
And what results do you proud of by now?
Tell you I'm proud would mean that I'm finished, I'm done. The work has been completed and Syria is prosperous. And clearly that is not the case. There is still so much more that needs to be done. Maybe one day when Syria is safe again, is prosperous again, you can ask me that question.
I think it's very important that people feel free to ask something. And they really do believe that their dreams or their wants comes true. They are not afraid to ask you because you are First Lady. And can you give me your recipe? How do you ask them to ask you something when they don't like to ask? And maybe they feel confused or not confused, they feel nervous about asking something.
Human dignity is very important. And as much as possible, I try to make sure that people are not embarrassed or offended in any encounter that we have. And so I'm proactively always asking what it is that I can do to help and how can I help alleviate some of their hardships. And I always say to them, you're not asking, I'm the one who's asking. It's my job to ask. It's my duty to ask. And in that way, I hope that I can encourage them or help them to be more forthcoming.
And the following question about safety. So we accompanied you in Syrian Trust in Development, and we also accompanied you on the way to this center, and you drive by yourself. Why do you allow this risk?
Very simply, I refuse to live in fear, Anna. Everybody in Syria, you could say, is at risk today. So why should I be any different? More importantly, how can I encourage people to continue living their lives, going to work and sending their children to school, if I don't do the same? That would be hypocritical. But to be honest, the greater risk for me personally is to be isolated from day-to-day life, because ultimately there is no substitute for being directly engaged on the ground.
And your way to Australia? We know that one piece of this route was greatly dangerous because from the one side there was territory that is under Daesh control, from the other side they're also under terror control. So why? For us it's incredibly that you drove. I saw by my eyes you drove alone in your car.
I do appreciate your concern. But from my perspective, these are Syrian women, mothers and daughters, each in their own way trying to deal with the hardships that have been brought about by this war. And crisis or no crisis, my interest is always, always to extend help to those who need it. And this is a priority above all other considerations. I continue to insist that I remain as accessible and approachable as possible because, again, there is no replacement for human interaction. It's how I learn and it's how I'm able to make a difference.
You're constantly exploring the country despite this risk, and you met with the people a lot. And what mood do you meet? What do they talk about? What do they ask you?
Conversations vary. There are stories of courage and resilience, stories of tragedy and hope, but always, always the bigger question on everybody's mind is when will Syria be safe again? When can we go home?
Since the first meeting with Mr. President and after all these years you are together, is he the same person as you once decided to marry?
In many ways, yes. He is the same person I met before he became president. He's very calm. He's very thoughtful and always polite. But probably one of the best things about him is that he is so easy to talk to. You can talk to him about anything and everything, and that's great.
And how does difficult military tasks or other difficulties of nowadays influenced him?
Well, of course, the responsibilities are much, much greater than before. The burden is tremendous. And that is where all his energy is focused and the majority of his time. But one of the things I admire as well about him is that despite these burdens and the demanding schedule that he has, he always tries to make some time for his family, especially our 3 young children. He takes his role as a father very, very seriously. He's a very giving man.
Mm-hmm. And what about you? What principally changed in you during these difficult times?
I'm no different to many other people in Syria, Anna. My family has been affected just as any other family in Syria. We are constantly moved and saddened by the tragedies that this country faces on a daily basis. And after 5 years of war, I think it goes without saying that in every home in Syria, there is a sadness that pervades, and ours is no different.
And how did your family cope with the tragic loss? I mean, brother-in-law of Mr. President.
Well, as all families cope, there is not a family in Syria that has not lost a loved one. Today, parents are attending the funerals of their children rather than their weddings. Grandparents are having to come out of retirement to help care for their grandchildren. And the number of single-parent families multiplies every single day. Some have lost 4, 5, 6 or more members. And that is a huge burden on the whole of society. So when you put our loss into perspective, it's by no means unique, and it doesn't deserve to be singled out. We cope. How do other people cope? We persevere, we continue.
Okay, the day when the Ministry of Defense was attacked, do you remember this day? Both you and Mr. President continue with your agenda, and what was more surprisingly for us, that you take your children to the school. Why? It's once again I have to ask the question about the risk.
The incident you refer to was in 2012, so quite early on in the crisis. At the time, my eldest was 10 and the youngest was no more than 7. So understandably, they were all frightened. The sound of gunfire was very close by. But the morning of that attack, I knew that this was going to be one of the most profound moments of their childhood. My instinct at the time, and I remember the day very vividly, as if it was yesterday. My instinct at the time was definitely not to run or to hide. And when I called the school and was told that they were open as usual, the decision was made. As I was walking my children to school, my youngest asked me whether I loved him. But let me tell you that I walked my children to school that day, not because I wanted to put them at risk, but because I wanted them to know what it meant to face down their fears and stand up for their convictions.
And we know that this vacation they spent being volunteers. What was their impressions? If they share with you, of course.
Of course. Today, Anna, two of them are no longer children. They're teenagers. But unfortunately, like the majority of their generation, most of their childhood has been spent in a war. This has forced them to grow up too quickly. But I like to feel that it's also helped them appreciate what really matters in life. And so almost every day, they'll come home with stories to share and questions to ask. And as you can imagine, I'm no longer the one setting the topic of conversation or determining what information they have access to. Sometimes they're angry and frustrated, sometimes they're sad. I believe it's my role as a mother to help them develop the skills that they'll need to formulate their own opinions and navigate the world around them, as opposed to telling them what they should be thinking or how they should be feeling. And ultimately, if I'm successful, they'll grow up to be independent thinkers.
And how did sanctions influence, first of all, the Syrian people and you as family?
Well, I don't think it's a secret to anyone that the sanctions on Syria today have affected Syrian people in very much the same way as the sanctions in the 90s affected socially, seriously, and mortally the Iraqi people. The only difference is that today nobody can claim, and especially those that enforce the sanctions, they cannot claim that they did not foresee the consequences on ordinary Syrian people. You have to ask yourself, where is the benefit of sanctioning basic food commodities? Where is the benefit of blocking vital access to medicines and healthcare equipment? Only a few days ago, I met with an old man who had just been diagnosed with cancer. And he was worried that he was not able to get the treatment that he needed because the chemotherapy was no longer available. That's what these sanctions are doing to ordinary people. And this is only one example. In fact, just a few weeks ago, I think it was actually last week, the UN released a report that cited the significant increase in poverty and the unmeasurable suffering to ordinary Syrians as a result of these sanctions. What's most ironic is that they were imposed by the so-called Friends of Syria. What this report doesn't tell us, Anna, is that the situation would have been much, much harder had it not been for Syria's true friends who have stepped in and helped offset some of the political and economic consequences of these sanctions. And in this regard, Russia has been tremendous. It has and continues to provide invaluable humanitarian and economic assistance to Syria. And it's these noble efforts that have helped loosen the chokehold on ordinary Syrians. And this is something we'll never forget. I think as for the sanctions targeting me specifically, They are, I don't think they are significant, especially when you put things into perspective.
So let's continue with the humanitarian issues. Can you describe the situation? Because we have very controversial information, for example, about the situation around Aleppo.
Much has been said about the humanitarian situation in Syria, but in truth, the severity of the situation is beyond comprehension. The displacement, the poverty, the sickness, the suffering is possibly unprecedented. Ironically, Western media organizations have chosen to solely focus on the plight of refugees and those caught up in rebel-held areas, whereas in fact the vast majority of people displaced are living across the rest of the country. And these people, as much as anybody else, matter. And nobody has the right to dehumanize them based on the lines of a map. Now, in terms of our aid efforts, we are of course extending emergency humanitarian assistance, but there's also an urgent need to restore people's ability to access public services. And this is very, very important. Beyond this, there are programs that are in place that offer psychosocial services, vocational training, and small interest-free loans. Educational support is also provided to children who are struggling or have been out of school for a long period of time. Ultimately, our mission is to ease the dislocation and to remove the indignity that these people have had to endure. And we must continue to do this to the very best of our ability with all the resources we have available to us.
I would like to ask about your reaction on different criticism from European press or US press. What do you feel during you read these articles or you see some TV sets? What do you feel? What do you would like to tell the people who target you?
Well, first of all, I think it's to be expected. It's part of the position, or it comes with the territory, as they say. Even as this interview wraps up, it's almost certain that I will be subjected to some pretty harsh criticism by certain people or media organizations that are only interested in portraying me in a negative or even superficial manner. That's their agenda, and there is nothing I can do about it. I think these comments are primarily used to test who we are as individuals. And if you do not remain grounded when you hear the positive, you're more than likely to fold when you hear the negative. You may remember also that at one stage I was the Desert Rose, the elegant First Lady bringing reform, and so forth. As nice as these comments may seem, they actually don't have a lasting impact on me. What's important is that I remain humble and true to who I really am. And as I said, if the positive don't get to your head, then the negative are not going to hurt you either.
Okay, and what is about the future? How do you imagine and how do you would like Syria to be as soon as possible?
Syria comprises of land that has been continuously inhabited for a very long time. Over thousands of years, this soil has been exposed to dozens of wars and invasions, and some areas were completely destroyed. I know that Syria can and will rebuild itself. What's important is that we tackle the internal and external factors that fueled and prolonged the war. We owe this to future generations. As Syrians, we've always prevailed, and this period in our history is no different. It is known or often said that Syria means rising sun, and Syrians will rise again, that I can assure you.
And the last question, during all the war times, you didn't flee the country. Did someone recommend you to flee to save your life, and what was your response?
Well, you're right on both counts. First of all, I've been here since the beginning, and I never thought of being anywhere else at all. And secondly, yes, I was offered the opportunity to leave Syria, or rather to run from Syria. These offers included guarantees of safety and protection for my children, and even financial security. It doesn't take a genius to know what these people were really after. It was never about my well-being or my children. It was a deliberate attempt to shatter people's confidence in their president. And suffice to say, these offers were foolish and not even made by people who were Syrian.
And what was the most harmful incident during this war? Maybe it was the story of people in the village of Zara, or maybe it was the story of this child named Omran Dakniesh.
Let me phrase the question slightly differently. Why was the fate of the children in Zara not given the same media coverage as the tragedies of Aylan and Omran? The Western media decided to focus on these tragedies because it suited their media agenda. It's actually the West that is dividing our children in this conflict according to the political beliefs of their parents. Aylan was a Syrian child, irrespective of what his parents believed, as was Omran and the other innocent children in the Zara village massacre. These are all children. They are all innocent children. And they are all a loss to Syria, irrespective of which side of the conflict we support. And as a Syrian, I am personally saddened by the loss of every single child, whether it's Aylan or Omran or the many, many others whose names did not reach Western headlines. Ultimately, humanitarian aid should not be determined by geography, political orientation, or religious belief. It cannot be allowed to be driven by political agendas.
So thank you for this meeting, really.
Thank you for coming.